graduate program, which is crazy. Yes, so I've already learned something. So her field is about rhetoric, and when I first met her, one of the first questions I asked her is, what does that mean? And so now I have a little bit of an understanding of what rhetoric it means, and I'm sure she's going to talk to us about it today. But it's the study of persuasion from ancient Greece to the present time, and especially the rhetoric of health and medicine. She writes about persuasion in a number of health and medical contexts, scientific publications, doctor-patient interviews, illness narratives, and pharmaceutical marketing, and decision-making from the Federal Drug and Food Administration. It's super interesting, so I know we're in for a big treat. She has a book, Health and the Rhetoric of Medicine, which is a foundational book in her field. And she has numerous articles in scientific journals and interdisciplinary health journals. Her first article on the FDA approval of the drug, I'm going to get this wrong, but flubenserine, I also know it as ADI, right? It was the first drug that was marketed for libido, basically, female sexual dysfunction. I think there's something like Loribotto, and probably you know how many are marketed for male libido versus female libido. Let's just suffice it to say it's a lot heavier on one side than on the other. She's a distinguished scholar at the Peter Wall Institute, recipient of the Killam Teaching Prize. She's a member of the First President's International Advisory Council of CIHR. So I'm not going to read the rest of it. I'm going to get to the fun fact, because there's a lot on here on her bio, and I want to read all of it, but you also much rather hear her. Her fun fact is that she's extremely excited about the return of Better Things with Pamela Adlon. It's this Thursday on FX. Now, not Fox, FX. I know I almost made that mistake. Sorry, FX. Now, so I was like, I don't know what Better Things is. What is this show? And so I looked it up on Google. I don't know how many of you have heard of Better Things. So it's a dark comedy. It's already had 3 seasons, so I don't know why I haven't heard of it. It's 97% rated on Rotten Tomatoes. Sounds pretty good so far. Oh, so here's the byline about what it's about. Sam Fox, a divorced Hollywood actress, juggles raising her 3 daughters and focusing on her professional commitments. I feel like that would be an awesome show. And I looked to see where it's streaming, and I don't think it's streaming anywhere in Canada, but you can get it on iTunes. This is not an endorsement. And FX. Yes, and FX, that's right. They did say that you can watch online. So I'm excited to watch that show. But first, I introduce Dr. Judy Segal. Thank you.
Amazing. Okay, hi everybody. Thank you for being here in the room and remotely. Okay, so thank you, Lisa, for the introduction, and Lisa and Emma for organizing this, and for the cluster. Long may it rain. And yet, jeepers. Okay, so can you hear me okay? All right. Okay, so my talk is mostly about breast cancer narratives in particular, and I have a bit of a preamble to it. So the weird thing is, I've given versions of this talk before, which is not weird in itself. Academics do this all the time, and I've updated and revised it. Of course I have. The weird part is how little, although nothing, not nothing, has changed in the public representation of breast cancer experience in the 20 or so years since I started writing about it. My own interest in breast cancer narratives began in 2001 when I read Barbara Ehrenreich's Harper's article, Welcome to Cancerland, some of you will know it, in which Ehrenreich, who had been recently diagnosed with breast cancer, railed against what she called the culture of pink kitsch, and against the suppression and even the prohibition of cancer stories that were, she said, not cheerful enough. In 2006, Samantha King, a sociologist at Queen's University, wrote Pink Ribbons, Inc., which later became a documentary film, which I recommend probably even more than Better Things. That book is about the corporatization of breast cancer and, quoting King, the tyranny of cheerfulness. King wrote about breast cancer runs and the way activity had begun to stand in for activism. By the time I read King's book, I was already well into a growing critical literature on cancer narration and well into thinking about the possibly coercive effects of the most publicly told breast cancer stories, stories of battle, survival, and triumph, stories often disconcertingly similar. These are some images I captured of the public life of breast cancer between 2006 and 2013. These are the breast cancer ladies of Estee Lauder. This is Susan G. Komen's very aggressive young breast cancer fighter in a muscle shirt. And this is the January pinup from the 2013 Breast Cancer Foundation calendar I bought that year at Safeway. You probably can't read what Ashley says about having breast cancer, but this is what it is. She writes, "I have grown as a person, faced some of my worst fears, and become a better woman because of it." Over the past many years, scholars, as well as many activists, like the late Barbara Brenner of Breast Cancer Action, and more than a few journalists, like Peggy Orenstein, for example, have written critically about troubling trends in the popular narration of breast cancer experience. In public discourse, though, there hasn't been a big change over time. This is a current image from the Canadian Cancer Society. We're still pink, and we're still fighting. Recently, too, Canadian celebrity Biff Naked, who was diagnosed in 2008 with breast cancer, published just 6 months ago in the Star Vancouver some reflections on her breast cancer experience. The article is titled, "Biff Naked, How Breast Cancer Made Me More Joyful." And here are a couple of posts currently at the website Cancer Hive, cancer with a C and the word answer, Hive, from Rethink Breast Cancer's Young Women's Network. I've never smiled more in my life than after my cancer diagnosis and during treatment. I've been nicknamed the happiest oncology patient. I'm grateful for the little things in life. I can see a positive out of any negative situation. These superpowers became more focused after my metastatic breast cancer diagnosis. And from Caring Bridge, an organization founded in 1997 whose mission, their website says, is to build bridges of care and communication, bringing love and support to patients on a healthcare journey, a post last week of 10 best cancer quotes to bring you and your loved ones some peace and hope. Quote number 1 is, "You're a fighter," and it came with a patient's endorsement. "When I was given a short time to live, I was told by one of my kids, 'Mom, you're a fighter, let's do this.'" Quote number 2, the one that's almost as good as quote number 1, is, "Never give up hope." And somehow quote number 9 is, "Everything will be okay." Anyway, that's the end of my preamble. My point, some things have changed since I started writing about breast cancer narratives, but a whole lot hasn't changed at all. I am by profession and by discipline, and as Lisa noted, a rhetorical theorist. And rhetorical theorists are interested in, for any situation of human interchange, this question, who's persuading whom of what, and what are the means of persuasion? My topics in rhetorical study have been throughout my career, as Lisa said, topics in health and medicine. And you may not at first see health and medicine as realms of rhetoric, the way you see politics or advertising, but consider this. In the absence of objective evidence from blood work or from images, patients may have to persuade physicians that they're ill and in need of care. Physicians, for their part, may have to persuade patients to begin and to adhere to courses of treatment. Manuals that classify diseases and disorders have to persuade physicians, that classify diseases and disorders persuade us to count some states as pathological and others not. Pharmaceutical marketers persuade consumers to request their products and physicians to prescribe them. And terms themselves, not just arguments, do rhetorical work. The word breakthrough persuades us to imagine medical research as a dramatic sort of enterprise, always promising new hope. Breakthrough, by the way, is the current name of the magazine of the BC Cancer Federation, a magazine that started out being called, annoyingly, I thought, Vim and Vigor, and then was called Forward before it became Breakthrough. The phrase fighting disease persuades people that they have failed at something when they can't stop being sick. Even innocent-seeming terms like caregiver. Caregiver creates a class of care receivers and tips the economy of families. In health and medicine, like everywhere else, we're persuading each other all the time. My research on breast cancer narratives began with the observation, which isn't my observation alone, that people don't fashion their own narratives out of only the events of their own lives. Narratives are composed using culturally available terms and plot lines and within a kind of moral economy of illness, virtues, and vices. That is, we use other people's stories to write our own stories, and we do this even when we don't mean to, and even when it harms us to try. In 2007, I published in a linguistics journal, actually, an essay about the most publicly rehearsed and widely circulating breast cancer narratives. The story goes, basically, I found a lump, I was scared, I stayed positive and I fought, I survived, now I'm a better person. In some ways, cancer is the best thing that ever happened to me. Here's an example of the type of thing. It's an excerpt from a story in the now defunct Breast Cancer Survivor magazine called Beyond. The story was one of a set of stories that appeared under the title, Cancer is One of the Best Things That Ever Happened to Me. I think I'm a kind of dominatrix with a capital D. I will dominate cancer. The disease will not control me. I have the freedom to choose. I choose to love myself, to love every gray hair and wrinkle, every kilo and curve. I choose to ride the emotional roller coaster, the wacky ride of highs and lows, because with each emotion, my existence resonates. I'm not the walking wounded. I was wounded, but now I'm walking into the spring of my life. My linguistics article viewed breast cancer narratives tilted that way as constituting a genre, a repeated story filling a social role and an advisory role, and doing it with generic features. I claimed that the genre itself perpetuated ignorance about cancer. It was, in a word, agnotological. I found agnotology a terrifically generative idea. Scholars spend lots of time and energy trying to find out how we know what we know. We call that epistemology, and much less time and energy trying to find out how we don't know what we don't know. That's agnotology. My essay argued that the most widely circulating narratives of breast cancer kept us ignorant about both cancer and the experience of it. Not only did these narratives give a dubious account of what was, for most people, not really a positive experience, they also seemed to say that cancer was a battle you could win by trying, and that if you failed, you were not only going to die, but you were going to die a loser. Mary Bryson, our own UBC Mary Bryson, and Jackie Stacy, writing about the distribution and responsibility and responsibility of blame and shame in the neoliberal politics of breast cancer, have brilliantly, I think, repunctuated DIY health, so do it yourself, as do it yourself. So the stories I wrote about in 2007 constituted a rhetoric of values. It's better to be strong than weak, coherent than chaotic, hopeful than scared or despairing. It's better to resist than to rest. I argued that these stories perpetuated the idea that cancer itself was a disease to be fought, as it were, not collectively through health policy or health care or environmental regulation, but rather individually by heroic individuals, one positive attitude and one low-fat diet at a time. Cancer's own biography, in the most common accounts, began not when a family moved downwind from a chemical plant or a person took a job at a car manufacturer, sorry. It began in story after story with the discovery of a lump or a shading on a mammogram. The story often ended in pink. You could, in the end, look good to feel better and participate in a survivor's run. I argued that the features of the standard breast cancer narrative had become so conventionalized, the story so prescribed, literally prescribed, that the genre wrote the story. Then every person diagnosed with breast cancer had to contend with this narrated set of values in the performance of their own illness, one way or another. The agnotology thesis is that the generic story suppresses not only cancer stories, other cancer stories like environmental or epidemiological stories, but also other genres, like genres of protest or social action in which cancer might be told. As Ann Boyer wrote recently, our genes are tested, our drinking water isn't, our bodies are scanned, but not our air. Okay, so that essay of mine may sound too critical to you. It did to one of my friends with breast cancer, who after reading my essay sent me a heartfelt and long email in which she referred more than once to my position as an outsider to the disease. Maybe if this outsider, she said, me, actually had breast cancer, she would see that triumphal stories are helpful, survival comes from personal battle, and fundraising, well, we take money wherever we can get it. Fast forward a couple of years, and I am diagnosed with breast cancer. Interestingly, to me at least, I discovered that I am not transformed by my diagnosis from a critical person into someone with a taste for pink t-shirts and group runs. In fact, over time after my diagnosis, I develop a better sense of how this narrative values thing actually works. My cancer places me in the drama that I'd been writing about, and I come to see the means by which the standard story asserts itself. I don't do this on purpose. I learn about the requirements of breast cancer storytelling the way a child learns language, in social interaction, mostly inadvertently. I'm at dinner with a friend across a table in a restaurant. It's a month after my surgery, and she asks how I am. I begin to complain, not about the cancer. I complain about all the things I don't like about being a cancer patient. I say, anyway, I feel neither positive nor embattled. I say it in a way that's not funny. I see my friend sit back in her chair, just a little. She folds her arms. I change the subject. Next week, different restaurant, different friend. I know what to say, and I know what not to. In the months between surgery and radiation, my unbidden first-hand research continues. I'm getting cards and emails from colleagues, old friends, former students, distant family members, friends of my daughter's mother-in-law. I'm touched to receive their good wishes, though frankly some of them say some very scary things to me. In fact, I'm impressed that anyone is speaking to me at all. I know it's hard to know what to say to someone with cancer, but here's something I start to notice. Many of the messages I'm getting are congratulating me for being strong and positive and brave. I know you're a fighter, they say. You can beat this thing. I begin to find these messages unsettling because I know I've provided no evidence at all of possessing any of these virtues for which I am being praised. But I'm intrigued by my cancer messages. People are telling me not that I should be strong and positive and brave. They are ingeniously, really from a rhetorical point of view, instead praising me for already being that way. At the same time, they're implicitly letting me know that it would be disappointing if I were otherwise. If what I was about to say in reply to these messages was that I was exhausted and afraid, I think, again, I should really stifle that. I write back and say, I'm fine, the pathology report was good, I'm not teaching, but I'm still working with graduate students, I'm looking forward to the radiation starting so that it can end. I write a lot of these messages. I'm not lying, but I'm not telling the truth either. The possibilities for the exhibition of me were narrowed with every messages that praised me already for being brave and positive. These are the mechanisms by which the standard story comes to dominance. A conversational partner folds her arms. A well-wisher confers approval preemptively. In the spring of 2010, after my lumpectomy and before the start of my radiation treatments, I set out to meet a commitment that I'd made some months before to write a topical op-ed for the Vancouver Sun. The features editor was keen on a cancer story for April 1st, the beginning of Cancer Awareness Month, and I obliged. I wrote a piece about how we talk about breast cancer and how our talk, by its very terms and conventions, inhibits a broader conversation and makes some cancer experience unspeakable. I called the essay, Cancer Isn't the Best Thing That Ever Happened to Me. Reader email in response to my op-ed was surprising, both in its quantity. I received about 50 direct replies separate from letters to the editor, despite the fact that the article didn't include my contact information and there was no comment section online. And the response was surprising in its substance. Every email, bar none, expressed gratitude and support. And I realized that 50 may not seem like, in the current context, like really a lot of answers, like nobody retweeted my article, and I didn't get as many as maybe one might get now. But in 2010, 50 was a lot of responses. Not a single message was the disapproving, pink-inflected comment I had convinced myself and warned my family I would get. The emails were versions of, I paraphrase, thank you for that. I have cancer. I feel nauseated, sad, terrified. I'm incredibly sick of pretending. This has all been a fabulous, if difficult, experience in personal growth. Here are some email beginnings. You don't need to read all of them. They're all they're quite similar. Thank you for your article on breast cancer not being the best thing. You expressed my thoughts perfectly. Thank you for giving voice to what so many people experience concerning the rhetoric of illness. I read your article in the Vancouver Sun today. What can I say? That's exactly the point. The messages were all like that. It was amazing. And here's the full text of one email, which is sort of representative. I'm writing to thank you for the piece you wrote for the Vancouver Sun. I don't know if it's because I'm a scientist, but I never had a self-improvement story to tell about my own experience with cancer. I'm a pragmatist and plain-spoken. Having cancer was terrible bad luck. I profoundly agree with what you said about how our friends and nearest and dearest want us to look as fighters rather than human beings who are surprised, scared, furious, and unhappy. I've had experiences in my life that have definitely made me a better person, deeper, wiser, etc., but believe me, cancer hasn't been one of them. I answered each email as it arrived. In some cases, my answers elicited further responses and more comment. When nearly a year later, I was invited by another UBC researcher to contribute a paper to an interdisciplinary workshop that was called Rethinking Cancer Survivorship, I thought back to my op-ed, the reader response, the emails themselves, and I wrote again to my correspondents and asked for permission to share their messages. Everyone who responded to my request consented enthusiastically. I tried hard not to think about the messages that came back as undeliverable. In research terms, I had collected wild data. I'm going to share with you now a sample of the responses to the op-ed, because for the survivorship workshop and then later for publication, I organized them by themes, 6 of them, and I've reproduced here just a couple of samples for each theme. And I kind of need also, in the interest of time, to just let the samples speak for themselves, but I think they do. So here you go. This is from my catalog of objections to the standard triumphal cancer story. The emails were written by people who have or had cancer, who are or were close to people with cancer. Some emails came from people whose encounters with cancer patients were professional, a retired family physician, a nurse, a nursing professor, a counselor, and writing from Texas, where some people like this actually exist, a cancer experience guide. Okay, so theme 1 was the requirement to be positive can be a burden. I sometimes feel like I'm not out there with survivors running, walking, singing the praises of the sisterhood. I'm in great physical shape, and I could do it, but it's not my style, and it never will be. And I'm still left with the feeling that I let someone down, or I didn't pay back my debt to society. Every time mail arrives from the Canadian Cancer Society or the BC Cancer Foundation, I'm reminded of my debt. Your article gave me affirmation that it was okay to think about my experience in any way I like, not conforming to the pink code is okay too. The article is the second one. The article is the first I've seen that makes sense to me as a breast cancer survivor. When I was first diagnosed, I was determined to be positive and strong, mainly because family and friends expected it. Now I describe myself as a cancer victim. First of all, I was a victim of the cancer, and then I was a victim of the poor judgment of doctors involved in my treatment. I don't believe running around in pink shirts is going to solve anything. Cancer is not an enriching and ennobling experience. I would certainly deny that breast cancer I had last year changed my life for the better. I was already living a happy, fulfilled life, would have preferred to go on blissfully ignorant of my own mortality. My overwhelming response was, and still is, anger. Just a minute. Yeah, about the whole thing. Cancer is not a gift, and breast cancer is not a gift. One should be able to feel fear, be angry, be anxious. There's nothing cheerful or positive about it. Absolutely nothing. And this one, it's just important, really important, I think. It's better to be acknowledged than to be congratulated. My mother died of cancer at 76 and my sister at 49. In each case, 2 years were filled with pain, fear, helplessness, hope, grit, determination, all the rest of the nouns that, as you say, become part of the pattern story of their lives. Were they courageous? Of course they were. Did they have a choice? No. Women have said to me, "You're so strong. I could never be like you if I had to go through what you've gone through." Well, the truth is, I've spent a good deal of my life feeling that I should be stronger than I am, and I don't want to contribute to that feeling in other women. I try to explain this, but I'm not sure that I get the point across because the response is usually, "No, you really are strong." To be congratulated is also to be assigned responsibility. I'm bothered by comments like, "I know you'll beat this thing because you have such a positive attitude." This seems to imply a degree of control over cancer that we simply do not have. A big part of my own dealing with my husband's cancer has been learning to accept the fact that we're not in control, that it's nobody's fault. So it's not helpful to get comments about controlling cancer's outcome. Will those people who expect him to beat this thing be disappointed when the disease comes back? Will they think he didn't have a positive enough attitude? My sister died of multiple myeloma. She was sick for a few years and in the hospital for the last 8 months of her life, and we spent a lot of time talking about the metaphors of disease and how people dealt with her and her disease. She was a family doctor. Mostly we came to intensely dislike the fighting metaphor. If she lost, then she didn't fight hard enough. That is so wrong. Reassuring others places a burden of care on the ill person. I learned that people who have never had cancer are very frightened of it and want to hear stories of success, hence the label fighter, not accounts of the difficulties. It's ironic that when I was in the deepest trouble, I had to play the part of a soother, consoler to others. Friends and acquaintances are so much more comfortable when I'm behaving like a good soldier, fighting the good fight and all that. I've often wondered if it's because any kind of serious condition, is so threatening to their own self-esteem and the world as they know it, they're scared at the real possibility that similar things might happen to them, scared of how they might respond, whether they will do it well and such. So the best way to get around their own fear is to react as they do, to play down the difficulties, the terror, the horror of the actual experience. And this is the last one of the collection. There is little space to tell or hear the truth about the experience of illness. The day after my surgery, I received a pink package with a little piece of soap and cream, a pink ballpoint pen, and even a small diary. I hate pink, and the whole pink ribbon movement. It must be awful, awful, awful for the women who are not in this group of strength and fight and happy endings, but are sick and die. The whole attitude of positivism blames these women because they're not positive enough. The story of these women nobody wants to hear. It's too scary for the healthy. It's seen as health promoting to express your feelings honestly, but frankly, some honest feelings are a lot more welcome and a lot more common than others. There's something bizarre about sitting in a group of cancer patients who are almost uniformly happy and optimistic. So, my modest and really accidental study suggests that the stories that circulate most readily in public, stories about fighting, about staying positive, about cancer being the best thing and a gift, are not helpful to many people living with or near cancer. I'm not arguing against being positive. It's probably true that being positive feels better. It's true that some people are helped through major illness by seeing themselves as fighters. Of course, I've known people who have had that experience. I'm all for what gets you through the day when you're sick. I'm not trying to suppress what people say about cancer so much as trying to expand it. Bright-sided cancer, a term that came from Audre Lorde and then was remobilized by Barbara Ehrenreich, may at first, bright-sided cancer may at first seem innocuous enough, but the repetition of heroic narratives naturalizes them and naturalizes their values. There is harm in the association of a particular kind of story with virtue and with praise, leaving blame for the rest. But as I suggested before, I believe, too, that some of the harm is in the genre itself of the personal narrative. The insistent focus on the individual must be at least inadequate when the matter to be addressed is not just a personal one, but a complex social, economic, and environmental one. In fact, we do now find more positive or angry cancer stories, but I'm not sure that these completely solve the problem of public narration. Narrative medicine, and its most prominent spokesperson, Rita Sharon, tells us that we need to honor individual stories, but individual stories. I wonder about both those things. The individual account is often so predictably self-focused that we don't even notice that there's no one else in it. And story, well, this is a genre with important and I think problematic conventional protections. A personal narrative is seldom interrogated. No one answers a story with an argument. That would be a genre violation. And we don't typically see a story as an argument, although in its rhetorical power, it really is one. That is, I'm not in the first instance arguing for a space for negative stories, although I'm sure we should be able to tell them and to hear them. I'm arguing rather for reflection and for writing and speaking more capaciously about cancer and indeed other serious illness. For one thing, isn't it strange that the battle metaphor is so strongly associated with cancer, as if that disease engages us personally in a way that other diseases don't? We don't talk about people winning their battle with heart disease very much or losing a fight with dementia. And even as we see changes in guidelines for screening mammograms, start them later, have them less often, we're more likely to read in the press a story of a life saved by early detection than a story of one interrupted by a false positive finding or an unnecessary surgery. That is, Even as we see a growing critique of cancer narratives, and to some degree a larger range of them, the simple, triumphal cancer story has continued to enjoy a kind of triumph itself. Why? And this is the question that I'd like to address now. First, as in all things, some forces are better organized than others. Susan G. Komen is very well organized, for example, and so is Estee Lauder, and so is the Canadian Cancer Society. There are political and economic explanations of the triumph of triumph, and they have to do with what kind of work is done under the banner of breast cancer research and who benefits. But it's also true that the appeals of battle, of individuality, of positive thinking, and of cultural compliance are rhetorical appeals and are very persuasive themselves. One reason, then, that positive stories maintain their dominance in public discourse is that they speak to the value of meaning in a familiar sort of way. As one of my email correspondents noted, people write, quote, write obituaries that say their loved ones died after a brave struggle with cancer, like they had to act as if the whole thing wasn't a terrible waste. The requirement of meaning and the sort of shelter from the abyss that meaning can provide can produce an impulse to narration. But we need to be careful about that impulse, because when we reach for narrative, we may find certain structures too readily available, and then the whole process of figuring out if there is something to be learned from illness experience is short-circuited by the salience of those structures. I have a personal anecdote. While I was in treatment, my daughter, who was then 30, although you wouldn't know this from the story, took on a little craft project. She made me what she called a Radvent calendar. It was a decorated 3D cardboard and construction paper object with 16 tiny boxes with their contents concealed by 16 tiny doors, one for each day of radiation. Behind each door was a little square of chocolate or a couple of fruit gummies. Each day, when I got home from the cancer agency and before I read my email, I opened a door and ate what I found. And that was it. The number of wide open doors was the number of treatments passed. The number of closed doors was the number of treatments remaining. You can invest that Radvent calendar with meaning, but for me, that thing was all about counting. I'm not saying I didn't feel loved, that my daughter hadn't moved me with her gift. I'm just saying I was counting, and all I wanted from these treatments was for them to be over. I wanted subtraction, not addition. The calendar made subtraction real. I declined to add anything, even meaning. I wonder if, as one way of resisting the most available cancer narrative, we shouldn't at least try to tolerate illness without meaning. We learn from experience, certainly we do, and cancer is its own pedagogy. I learned some things from having cancer, but what I learned is better represented as a list than a story. I learned that some people become temporarily brainless when they encounter a person with cancer, and that by my calculation, 7 seconds is the maximum length of a good hug under these conditions. Longer hugs made me cry, and they became about the other person in the hug, the one who was going to miss me when I was dead. I learned how low the bar for good news can drop, like you have cancer, but you don't need chemotherapy, or you're having chemotherapy, but you're not too sick to eat, or you're too sick to eat, but you've lost some of the weight that your other medications were making you gain, or you're dying, but you finally got an appointment with that psychologist you wanted to see. I learned there are lots of things that get called the cancer experience, as if it were one thing, but my experience with a stage 1 breast cancer is very different from the experience of a person with a stage 4 lung cancer, so why do we talk about the cancer experience at all? The list of what I learned goes on, but they lack a story about the experience as a whole, a story in which I learned something on a grand scale from being sick. This guy, too, was in The Onion a couple of years ago. I believe that one reason the triumphal story survives is that it does entail the cancer has meaning. The account in which we're diagnosed and suffer and maybe die isn't just a sad story. It's a story that confers no meaning on suffering. Perhaps, in fact, it doesn't count as a story at all, only an assemblage of events and affects leading up to nothing in particular, and perhaps such an unnarrative for that reason is intolerable. My email correspondents constitute a small sample of self-selected speakers. Still, in the uniformity of their messages, they confirm that the most available narratives are not always the true ones, and they suggest that despite the failures of truth, triumphal narrative survives in part because it satisfies a general craving for meaning. It's not always the patient's own craving. While some of us wish to find meaning in illness, some of us would prefer to turn away from the demand of coherence itself and see cancer as meaningless. So close with another anecdote, not about me. I presented an early version of this paper several years ago at a public talk sponsored by Laurentian University at a very cute cheese shop in Sudbury. Really was cute. At the end of my presentation, I was approached by a woman who said she had been treated for breast cancer nearly 25 years earlier. She said that for all these years, she'd been trying to make sense of her disease, trying to find a reason for it, formulate an account of it, take a grand lesson from it, maybe have a different sort of life because of it. But she was unable, even with the support of friends and family and a counselor, to do any of these things. She said she felt, after hearing my talk, at peace for the first time since her diagnosis. Her breast cancer, she said, was just bad luck, and she could stop thinking about it. I think that's the end. Thank you. Wait, I have 2 more slides, because one of them is like a totally illegible list of sources, but I can get that to you if you want it. And yeah, then my thank you slide and my email address.
So this time people can contact you. You're not, it's not just, you know, like the Vancouver Sun article, there was no way to contact you. So maybe you'll get more than 50
No, more
replies.
than 50, yeah. True.
Well, thank you so much. I really, I don't know how the rest of you feel, but it gave me a lot to think about. And I'm just going to give, while people are thinking of questions, because I'm assuming there might be a question or two, I just thought, in my own family, we've had an illness very recently, and it was really interesting that I felt like it was a burden to convince others it was okay, right? And people would. So one of my best friends was like, one day I'm not going to think about it. So just walking, and she said, "I'm so glad you're back," like as if I wasn't another person with this, you know, like she didn't like it. I think it is all about people. Not only this, but a big part of it is people not wanting to think about. Oh, the microphone doesn't want to talk. But are there any questions? Well, the people online, are there any questions online? I have a question. Yes, Missy. Put in the microphone if people online can't hear. Yeah.
Okay. First of all, thank you for the talk. My question is about what seems to be the gendered nature of this issue. In your examples, I only noticed one person talking about a man with cancer dealing with this burden, and one of the people you quote described having a debt to society, and it feels to me like this debt is a debt that women have, and this burden to constantly be, you know, soothing people. Nurturing, exactly. So I was wondering if you had written about that aspect, or if you had more to say about it.
You have to go, and I have to go back. Sorry.
There's a lot to say about breast cancer and gender, and one of the things is that 1% of people who get breast cancer are cis men. And so there are lots of different ways of looking at the gendering of it, and also, like, very importantly, the kind of thing that a breast is in our culture, which seems to mean, well, it seems to have meant that fundraising for breast cancer is like just completely outsizes fundraising for any other form of cancer. So yes, and okay, so everybody, like, of all the replies that I got, everybody but one person was a woman, and the man who wrote to me wrote this: you said something about environmental problems or environmental causes of breast cancer in your article, and then sort of explained to me how, you know, that was a really important thing, and could have taken up more of my, I mean, he was very supportive and everything, but he
was mansplaining.
He was mansplaining to me about environmental causes of breast cancer. So yeah, the kind of layers and ramifications of gender, really important. And one of the things that Mary Bryson has written about is not just the gendering of breast cancer as it affects heterosexual cis women, but also how it affects a much wider population. And I think it's really important to think about all of the different ways breast cancer is experienced by many different kinds of people. But I mean, that's why just like those original slides that I showed you, particularly the S.G. Lauder one, with these, I mean, that is a very strange and disturbing representation of what breast cancer is. And a lot of the imagery of breast cancer is, first of all, like fighting stuff, like the drug Arimidex, anastrozole, has two big pink boxing gloves in the ad, and the images of women are white, middle class. Like, it's just really an extraordinary way of representing breast cancer to the world. So yeah, that is really important. And the nurturing thing you mentioned, super important. But also not only true of breast cancer. A friend of mine who died recently from ALS spent so much of the last years of her life telling people not to worry, that she was okay, that things were going well. Just so much of that she felt was something that she had to do, because she made everybody so uncomfortable, you know. So yeah,
that's a very disappointing part, I think, is the burden that we place on people to make other people feel better.
Yeah.
When you're trying to support, you know, as a, we're all, you know, I think most people are trying to support the person, but we're not doing it in a way that is helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. No, everybody. I mean, the original, the Cancer Isn't the Best Thing That Ever Happened to Me article was trying to also be kind to all of those people who were really trying, who were like literally wishing us well, you know, like they were really just trying to make us better. And there are, you know, there are family and friends and people who care about us. But they don't always make it easy for us to be honest about the experience that we're having.
So, other questions? Because I'm going to ask her some advice. Any other questions? You have a question? Mona? On that same note. But you have to wait to the microphone, because otherwise people can't hear.
I guess, what could your support system do to actually support you in a way that you want to be supported, you know?
I was basically my question.
I was very lucky to have a partner who wasn't afraid of me, like wasn't afraid when I was afraid. So that was somebody that I could cry to, and who was with me. When I was preparing this talk, I allowed myself to go back through the very big stack of stuff that I had accumulated over years of writing about this and collecting things. And one of the things was an email that I had written to a friend that said that my partner was so amazing at just being with me every step of the way that I felt like he was going to like crawl into the CT scanner with me if he fit. And that sort of just support was really good. I really liked when people said, I'm bringing over a lasagna rather than what can I do? You know, like people not putting the burden on me, like there's one more thing for me to think about. What can you do? So I really liked it. People just did stuff. People bought me books because I was home for a while, you know, that sort of thing. So I think, and people like having my sister has breast cancer right now. And one of the things that's happened is that we have like really terrific talks about what it really feels like for her to be going through this and what she's scared of and ways in which our experiences were similar and not similar. But I'm never scared of what she's going to say. Like I can receive what she's going to say. And she was kind of like that with me too when I was going through it. So I think being open to listening to the hard stuff, not giving somebody who is going through a major illness something else to think about, which is how can they include you in the thing that they're going through, and being kind of, I don't know, I really made a lot of other people cry, and I hated that. I mean, I wasn't kidding about what I said about the hug. It was very stressful for me to see these very sad-looking faces looking at me like I was going to die and they were going to miss me so much. I hated that. So I just wanted to be treated like, you know, going through this thing. You want to talk about it, you know, things hard.
Thank you. As you were giving your talk, I remember I was recalling an NPR piece I'd listened to several months ago about, it was about a woman who had a Chinese grandma living in China, and she'd been diagnosed with cancer, and the family decided not to tell her about it, and then she made that movie, and I think she wrote a book. Yeah. Yeah, This American Life, yeah. And I remember that narrative, especially the narrative of silence and keeping everything hush-hush, was one I kind of grew up with in India as well. And I remember also being very overwhelmed when I first moved to Canada 6 years ago, and I saw a lot of posters with taglines in the genre of like F cancer and things like that. And just the violence and the sort of aggression towards it. And I was wondering that if in your readings you found this to be kind of a typically North American, or I don't want to say Western phenomenon, but it is different from anything that I'd ever seen. And I was wondering if you've seen this across the board in most foundations in the world, or if you, I don't know.
I think that in North America, the kind of thing that you're describing, where the diagnosis was kept from the person who was ill, I think that was quite common until people started talking about cancer, and it came quite late, like in the 1960s, I guess, was when Edith Bunker on All in the Family had a breast cancer scare, and it was like really hush-hush, and she didn't want to tell her husband. And then, but I mean, in fact, she was told, was she who was not able to share the information. Or, you know, several things that were in that mid-20th century where you couldn't talk about this sort of thing. And also, before that, like in the 40s and the 50s, if people got cancer diagnoses, like information would come in plain brown envelopes to people who weren't the person who actually had the cancer. So there was an enormous amount of secrecy about it. And one of the things that kind of has given me pause as I've done this work is that I don't want to be heard to be saying that we should like return to some kind of silence because we don't want this proliferation of stories. So of course we want there to be more talk, not only about this, but other kinds of illness and experiences that people are going through.
So do you remember that they used to even say the big, I think there was a show called The Big C, but we wouldn't,
Oh,
when
yeah,
I was growing up,
that was later.
we didn't say cancer. So even when they started, it was like the Big C. You couldn't, and that's why I said cancer, because I remember family gatherings where people would say, oh, so-and-so has cancer.
Yes, my father called it the Big C. He didn't have it,
yeah,
but the other thing he did was that in the 60s also, the public service announcements were 7 warning signs of cancer. And the first one was a lump or thickening in your breast or elsewhere. The second one was a sore that does not heal. And then I don't know what the other 5 were, because at that point my father would turn off the television. Like, he was so terrified. And anyway, the American Cancer Society changed 7 warning signs to 7 steps to good health. Like, so they've just been kind of working on these ways of making it possible for people to have information or know what to watch out for without completely freaking out. But you're asking about something cross-culturally and whether it is a particularly North American way to do this, like, head-on fighting. I think it is actually quite North American, but I wouldn't rule out Western, because a lot of the stuff that I have been reading is Western, but international is Western European, and a couple of the emails that I got at the time in 2010 were from the Netherlands, and they were, somebody here had just sent the article to somebody there, and she's actually one of the people that I quote here. It seems like that is a kind of a general Western attitude.
Just wondering if there are any other questions. Wait, I think we have time for one more quick question.
I'm just wondering, well, I guess I'm seeking advice, because most of us are health researchers, and I'm thinking that in my capacity as a health researcher, I want to be more cognizant of narratives in general, because this is obviously really important, and I'm wondering if you have any advice for researchers in general.
Collaborate with people that study rhetoric.
Your call will be disconnected.
I